at LCC. So I'm Simon Munk. I'm the infrastructure campaigner at London Cycling Campaign, and I was for a decade or more prior to joining LCC a campaigner at Walter Forest Cycling Campaign in the Mini Holland area before there was a Mini Holland area. And in fact, I think one of the things that I'm trading on endlessly in my career is the fact that we went from a political cadre in Walter Forest who essentially was saying, well, we gave you an ASL at the front of the lights, what more could you possibly want, to a political group that delivered probably some of the most amazing schemes the UK has ever seen. So hopefully I know a little bit about political will. Let's just try and we'll just try and, yeah, there we go. Very brief plug for LCC. We have a whole bunch of guides up online about how to campaign, why to campaign, where to campaign, etc. This rather snazzy graphic is stolen from our campaigning guide that's online, but if you go to lcc.org.uk/pages/activism, there's a wealth of resources. We're all on Twitter and online and whatever, so you can always find us. But as you'll have guessed, well, I probably should have said really clearly up front, I'm just doing 10 minutes very briefly on political will, what it is, how to get it, who you need to get it from. So that's the activism pages. Okay, so who has the power? The very simple reality is there are two people that any campaign to do more in active travel in any council or any borough, as far as I'm concerned, there are two people that really count, and that is the leader of the council and the cabinet lead on transport, the environment, whatever it is that covers this kind of area off. I over and over again, and I really wanted to kind of present ideas with beers because we keep hearing some of the people kind of raise this as an issue here, particularly in this crisis, particularly as things are kind of unfolding really rapidly. What happens if my council isn't doing anything? I've been told the officers are a real problem, etc. Officers are not the problem. What happens, you know, some places officers are dreadful, and if they are, then it is the job of the cabinet lead and the leader of the council to sort them out. In some places the officers are great, but they cannot get any good schemes through if the cabinet lead and the leader are not on board. So everything that I tell local groups in LCC to do all the time is about what they do with their leadership politically, because those people, if they get it, they will start pushing officers to do more or enabling officers to do more if officers are keen. You know, other councillors can be blockers. You can have ward councillors or area councillors who are pro or anti, but if the cabinet lead and the leader are really behind the programme that you want to be behind, them to be behind, they will find ways to surmount these problems. So these are the people at the top, the eye of the pyramid, as it were, on the dollar bill. These are the sinister secret powers that you need to focus on. How do you reach them? And I think this is something that I come up against with campaigners in London over and over again, is you need to stop trying to make this about what you care about, and you need to start making this about what they care about. So what do the leader and the cabinet lead care about genuinely? What do they respond to? Do your research. LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, the local press are all your friends. Trying things is an amazing thing. Now, one of the stories I tell about this is we had a cabinet lead in one of the boroughs in London who I have dealt with for a few years. They're gone now, they're not there anymore. And during that period of time, they would consistently talk about social justice issues, BAME community, and those were key. So the local group, the local cycling group, and for that matter, a walking group, spent ages of time and effort and energy producing detailed research, all of the evidence base to show why cycling and walking are so vital for social justice outcomes. Made no effect. But what we noticed in the end was that every single time this person, either there was a demonstration or a protest or something happened and it got in the local press, or this person was seen on a bike and there was a photo in the local press, suddenly you got a scheme, suddenly you got something moved forward, suddenly something happened. So that group, for a year or two at the end of this person's campaign, tenure, They just spent all their time on getting local press. So it's not about what they say they care about. It's about looking for patterns in people's behavior and how they tweet, what they tweet about, what they do, etc. Their voting records, everything like that, to try and find out ideas of what you might approach to tie to cycling. So this is another thing that comes up for campaigning groups all over the UK all the time. When politicians, and I've said this, when politicians don't want to do what you want them to do, they don't understand and they don't care, what do you do? And invariably, lots of groups in London and lots of groups elsewhere, I've said, just say all the time, well, we should just attack them. And actually, that can work, but it's a hard slog and it can be really tough. And sometimes it doesn't work at all. You attack someone and they just go, oh, I don't like you. And they kind of turtle up, and that's the end of that one. So how hard you go in, how soft you go in, how good a cop you are, how bad a cop you are. My view is, for campaigners like me, it is by any means necessary. I will do what it takes to make sure that politicians listen to me, hear my voice, hear what we're concerned about, get on board and start moving. But that doesn't necessarily, in fact, it rarely means just going at them on Twitter. And, you know, so you've got to be really, really careful about how you deal with people. And most of your interactions as a campaigner should be very constructive and positive, because really people don't like being hated. They do quite like being loved. I talk regularly to groups about an escalating strategy. Try doing something nice, then doing something a bit harder, then doing something a bit harder still. Even tell politicians, if you do something good now, we will praise you. If you don't do anything good now, next week we're going to come back and we're going to do something bigger. I've said to many groups, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. If something doesn't work, change it up. One of the things that, when I came into LCC 5 years ago, one of the things I saw in a lot of groups was there was almost a little gang mentality. Like, you'd get to a room of LCC activists, there'd be 10 of them in a room all sitting around, and they'd be very, very kind of happy in their misery. Like, we're right, everyone else is wrong, no one likes us, but we're all a little gang against the world. Don't do that thing, yeah? Find a way to find common ground with politicians, find a way to find a way forward. Change it up. If what you're doing doesn't work, change it up. Don't just sit there and be happy that things are always going to be terrible. And I've said here, don't make perfect the enemy of good. The other thing that we find with LCC groups over and over again is we get a good scheme, but not a great scheme. And suddenly it's like, here are all the problems with the scheme. Don't just find the problems, find the solutions, move things forward. This is two unnamed politicians, one of whom famously has a very, very funny handshake. This is the moment, I think, really, and this is the moment, what happens when you start actually shaking hands with politicians? What happens when you start winning people's hearts and minds? I've stolen this from Labour Cycles. Chris Kenyon from Labour Cycles, I've been talking to him about how he wins political will over. And he's got kind of a 5-stage process. Does the politician understand the problem? Do they understand the scale of the problem? Are they informed about the problem? Do they care about the problem? Do they understand the solution? What does the solution look like? How are we going to move forward? Do we share a solution? Do we share a vision of a solution? Prioritization. Do we understand how important doing more walking and cycling is within the scale of other things that the council is doing? Are they willing to invest political capital? So you've built up votes and power and all these things. Are you then going to spend it wisely? And finally, a legacy. Do they understand that this will become what they're known for, that they will be known for doing good things? And he says only that one at the end of all the others, when you have real good alignment between the campaigning groups and the politician, do you start talking about a legacy or about, you know, what you're known for? What does political power, what does political will look like? It looks like deeds, not words. You know, this is a really important scheme. This is a bunch of people cycling. When you have this, you know you have some political will. When your politicians start talking about how they want to do something and they're trying to do something and they'll find ways to do something, not giving you 50 reasons why they can't do something, that's when you have political will. When they are coherent in their responses, about an issue. If you look at, for instance, Claire Holland in Lambeth right now, she's utterly coherent on her policy platform and why this is important to her. Momentum is there more schemes coming, you know, not just one scheme and then nothing for a drought for years. When's the next scheme? When are we going to get the next scheme? And finally, engagement. Are they willing to talk to groups? They might disagree with you, but are they willing to have the discussion, the conversation in a very real way and actually listen to you, hear your side of the view, change their opinions? And are you willing to change your opinions around their views as well and form some kind of alignment? That's a very, very rush job through political will.
So it's my usual update, 14th week. It's based on my original article here, and I'm not now doing updates on the RDRF website every week. I'm going to just being done on YouTube by the excellent Simon Still and Steve. Simon is keeping the presentations and the YouTube is done by Steve. This week I'm going to have some flying animations, so it looks a bit funny. But again, the crucial thing is we are still at crunch time. Some things are happening, some things are not. So I'm going to talk about good and bad, where we are now. If you want the links, then do email me on that address, chairrdrf@aol.com. In general news, first of all, very good chunk on Channel 4, no going back. A lot of stuff on Waltham Forest, Mini Holland, etc., no going back. However, also we've got cheaper parking for EVs and other privileges raised. And also look at that article on garden villages locking in car dependency. And we've still got the massive road building program in the background. So some good stuff, all the bad stuff still there in the background. Right, now the big thing from last week is, are we going to be looking at the possibility of more money coming in? And that's from the, you can read this in Carlton Reid's article. The UK government dangles £100 billion for green recovery infrastructure. Deadline June the 18th. Do read that article. It's about how there may be some more money coming in. And a comment on that was made by someone called Brian Deegan, whoever he is. Most city regions have 500 million to 1.5 billion walking and cycle network plans, particularly Greater Manchester, Sheffield, Liverpool, West Midlands, and also the cycleway associated with HS2. Now is the time. So bids need to go in there, or to say, we have these plans, give us the money. It gives us good return, value for money, footfall for retail, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now this week, the week starting yesterday, 15th of June, the DfT will let England highway authorities know about the success of Tranche 1 bids by, more or less now, beginning of this week. As Roger Geffin said last week, all the highway authorities in England outside London have sent in bids, so we'll see what happens with them. The invitations for Tranche 2 will go out this week, probably requiring more public engagement. So that's why the subject this week is so important. This week or next, there'll be an updated national cycling and walking plan. Otherwise, for more money, we'll have to wait for the formal CWIS 2 after the next spending review. And hopefully this week, there'll be announcements of further allocations from TfL. Okay, now my take is that there's a kind of sense of drift. The people who are going through the motions have been going through the motions. People who are good have been stonking along. But basically, if you look on the ground, there are bits and pieces, but not anything like enough. The need to press further is obvious. We've already been talking about that, and it's actually particularly relevant in London, where there is a sense of, not really getting stuck in. So let's look at what's happening outside London. Quick review. Hampshire's put in some pop-ups, but Rushmore Council is rolling back. Liverpool, the second of 7 cycle routes started today, 4.5 miles to city centre from Sefton Park. And what's interesting is that on this day when it's gone in, I noticed, and some other people noticed, the cycle lane was a bit narrow. So they're immediately going back and saying, yeah, it should be widened. Offer of free cycle parking to businesses from West Midlands Combined Authority. Southampton made a U-turn because of residents wanting parking not to be removed. And there's a bit of a Twitter storm about that. You can see that there. So there's an issue about campaigning. Simon Munk got stuck in with the guy there. Do have a look at that. Now, Greater Manchester. I would like to be told by the Greater Manchester people what actually is happening with Manchester City Council. We were lambasting them last week for not having promised to do anything, being the sort of fly in the ointment up there. They then, and the all-party parliamentary cycling walking group were complaining. And so Sir Edward Lees then said, oh, I want an apology from you because we are doing some stuff. So I don't know the details there. Elsewhere in Trafford, we've got an interesting cycle lane. I'm just going to show a photograph, and also the comment made about it by Chris Boardman, who so often manages to get exactly the right words. This isn't a cycle lane. It's a travel lane for people with no car and those that don't want to use one, saving valuable spaces for those that have absolutely no choice. And there it is, nice and wide. Thank you. Okay, now Edinburgh, these have gone in. Someone said, yeah, but are they on the primary cycle routes? It's not enough. Not enough is going in so far, as I understand it. You know, I am up to, you know, I'm dependent on local people saying what exactly is going in, if it's any good or not, because you see the photographs, you think, oh, that's nice, but it could be just 1 or 2 bits and pieces like that. Okay, now London, right. So, yeah, sense adrift. And good article there by Simon saying, where's the pace? You know, we're lagging behind, particularly if you compare us with Paris. The Silvertown Tunnel is still the big elephant in the room. Do go to spot the Silvertown Tunnel, stop the Silvertown Tunnel people. You know, we really can't crack on with things if that is going to be the situation. Heidi Alexander has said we can't carry on with the same funding model. We're not going to get the revenue from buses. We must have more money, etc., etc. Well, you know, maybe an idea to cancel the Silvertown Tunnel, although it's going to be funded by PPI. Now, Euston Road, we were promised. That hasn't gone in, or hadn't by this morning anyway. Regent's Park, yeah, it's a complicated one. It's run by a Quango called the, sorry, not a Quango, it's not even a NGO of any kind. The Crown Estate Paving Commission, which is a very weird body. There is a need for somebody to come in and knock heads together. Royal Parks, Westminster Council, Camden Council, TfL. You know, maybe people have been suggesting more ride-in demonstrations because it's filling up with cars again. It was actually a demonstration of supercars there, of people getting these Maseratis and whatnot driving around. Good news from the 22nd of June, the congestion charge will increase to £15 a day and operate 7 in the morning till 10 o'clock, 7 days a week. And we could do that being rolled out across the rest of London, or smart charging or whatever. TfL aren't talking about that yet. Okay, now I've complained about cycle training in London not being done. I talked about it with Will Norman on the phone, I think first week in April. Well, now finally something is being done to the boroughs who have a strong track record of delivering it, whatever that is. I have different views on cycle training from some others. High proportion of switchable trips, population with a high propensity to switch to cycling, and new or existing cycling infrastructure. So a lot of qualifications there, and it's not going to happen until the end of June. And that's a hell of a long time since the beginning of lockdown. Sorry, TfL, Will Norman, but that is where it is. Now, there's a guy called Bruce Lynn in Southwark. Now, he did some counts from his window, actually, in Southwark. And this is actually very interesting. This is about what was happening in May. Now, don't forget, in Southwark, people who have been cycling have been people generally commuting. Now, their jobs haven't been there because they've been working from home, or their businesses have just closed down, maybe not to open again. We don't know. But commuting cycling, very important. The weekend cycling has shot up by about 3 times. But in the working week, cycling has gone down. It's going up a bit. Motor traffic's gone down, but is also increasing. We're at this time where motoring is beginning to increase. Modal share, the split for female cyclists is up, that's good. But commuter transport cycling is possibly down by 70%. That may not resume at where it was because people have been furloughed, laid off, businesses closed, or they're working from home. So, you know, we really, really are going to have to push. It isn't that wonderful rosy future just lying ahead of us. So let's look at some London boroughs. Brent, they finally got their plan out, and Brent cyclists made a very nice response to it there. City of London doing some good stuff as usual, time closures to motor vehicles and point closures to make streets one way. The 15-mile-an-hour speed limit, which has been talked about for about over a year, which will be new in the UK. It's finally trying to get that together. It's still going to be not quite mandatory because of issues with the DFT, but it's coming in. On-street parking bays being converted to cycle parking, that's very good. They haven't managed to get the outside seating areas yet because of issues with pedestrian social distancing on the space where seating areas would go. Hammersmith and Fulham are stonking along with great big wide cycle lanes. There's one Shepherd's Bush Green. Look at those boroughs at the top: Barnet, Harrow, Havering, all the H's, or most of them, Bexley, Islington. They don't seem to have done anything or put in bids or whatever. So bad boys there. Lambeth, they are stonking along. There's Claire Holland saying excited to share that work on the second emergency low traffic neighbourhood linking Herne Hill and Brixton starts. That was this last weekend. 3 bus gates going in, point closure there. 4 miles freed up for people to move around safely, reclaimed road space. Lewisham also beginning to get in there. Look at those 2 links. The first link and the second is a tweet from Councillor Sophie McGeever. 6 modal filters, initial phase of 30 are going in this week. There is a bit of an issue. Roger Stocker has raised the issue of how they seem to be consulting on making the measures permanent before the temporary ones have gone in. So a bit of a question there. But Lambeth, Lewisham, City looking good. Merton has put some stuff in. I imagine those are cycle lanes, not advisory, cycle lanes. It could be footway extensions. I don't know, but cycle lanes. Okay, guess what? City of Westminster. Ooh, look at that really dynamic logo there. Whoa, I'm being sarcastic, just in case you don't know this. They have been putting in paint. They haven't been putting in, they've been putting in advisories in the door zone, a lot of criticism of that. Now, my question is this going to be funded? Now, obviously, Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea in the centre, the two bad people, as it were, are ones who don't actually need money from TfL. So maybe they're just putting stuff in and saying, okay, don't fund us if you don't want to. And I would hope that TfL says, sorry, this isn't in line with what the original guidance was. It's not in line with the Furness letter. We're not going to fund it. I would hope to see that. Will Norman, if you're listening, do let us know. There's City of London again, and look, big, stonking, nice big cycle lanes, but you know, they are the exception that proves the rule. Sorry, a bit complicated here. Mythbusters. This was good to see from Lambeth, you know, since we're talking about community engagement. They put in this sort of set of answers to low traffic neighborhood bingo, like bicycle bingo. You know, what about the old people, etc. However, there has been, someone has said that it's not very good on disabilities, it's patronizing or whatever, but you can have a look to see how good it is. I think it could be a bit punchier, but you know, well done Lambeth cyclists for trying. There's also a good information sheet from Brent cyclists there, you know, answering your queries about what a low traffic neighborhood actually is. Chris Boardman was on an all-party parliamentary group cycling walking webinar last week, and he suggested these messages. Not everyone has a car. We are looking after everyone. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for your patience. This lane is for those who normally rely on public transport. If you can ride, you're helping free up space for those that can't. Thank you. So there's his nice messaging. The campaigns, still got Transport Action Network campaign to bring a legal action against the government's road building program. Don't forget, you can still go to the Widen My Path, stick a pin in the map site, which is being hosted by Cycling UK. There's an action there, and in London you can still, if you haven't, get in touch with your council using this template. So that's it, and that was the end of Bike Week.
Yeah, so I'm Ben Addy. I'm the head of collaborative design at Sustrans in London. Have been at Sustrans for quite a few years now, and our team kind of lead up the community engagement and co-design across a number of projects, you know, around London. And in response to COVID-19, we've been thinking about the role of engagement and where that sits, and even, you know, how that's feasible during the changing and evolving stages of lockdown. Apologies, my slides aren't. When I'm always writing these, I'm always like, God, I've got to get some templates and get some really amazing photos, and then lo and behold, I find myself back at the desk writing the presentation, thinking the same thing. So apologies that they're not as visually stunning as they could be. I guess for me, in terms of engagement, we've been here before. So, you know, in my time at Sustrans, and just, you know, generally as somebody who's interested in the city and the function of the city, you know, engagement has come and gone, and the focus on it, and the kind of how people feel it's where its role sits has ebbed and flowed. But from my perspective, engaging effectively, and this is particularly relevant to, you know, as other speakers have been saying, that the low traffic neighborhoods, the filtering, on those schemes, it gives the scheme a much stronger chance of success. And that meaningful engagement doesn't have to be one-dimensional, or it shouldn't be one-dimensional. It shouldn't just be a kind of online platform. It shouldn't just be, it should be a sort of holistic approach. But one interesting thing for me, just in the conversations that I've had, both with politicians and with officers and different people at TfL, is that there's this sort of feeling that it's all or nothing with engagement. So collaborative design has become a bit of a buzzword, and yeah, it's something that is really important to me. But it's really important to remember that meaningful engagement can happen on a spectrum. At one end, you have the collaborative design, where you have residents and community members, and you've got the time and resource to develop ideas together and come up with ambitious solutions. But then at the other end, you've got inclusive, comprehensive, and really effective communications. And for me, the kind of objective on any project, and that does depend on time and it does depend on resource, is about delivering as far along that scale as you can, but remembering to be realistic and recognizing the place for different forms of engagement. So yeah, lots of conversations with people who have been saying, well, we just don't have time to do co-design. We don't have months to give to engaging really deeply with people. But the point is, it doesn't always have to be co-design. Then I think it's important to talk about why we need to do it. For me, there is a moral imperative to it. I feel like if we, I believe strongly, I come from an international human rights background prior to Sustrans, so the social justice element of all of our work, and why we're all here, partly why we're all here. Social justice for me is deeply rooted into the function of the street, and certainly at the moment with conversations, much needed conversations around equality, that's felt even more strongly. And I'm concerned that without engagement, those who stand to benefit the most from the changes, the evidence that shows BAME communities being impacted more by COVID, and also, the poor air quality and road danger affecting more deprived communities, certainly in London. And I'm just concerned that without effective engagement, those communities will be excluded. They won't understand that the changes are for them and that they can be a part of them. And these measures will simply be done to them. And then also, in my line of work, I obviously talk about engagement a lot with lots of people. And there's this kind of perception that engagement is inherently risky. If you talk to people, it's going to cause a problem, where clearly one way or the other, they're going to find out about it. And it's much better to be there at the forefront, talking to them, informing them, ensuring that there's that level of understanding. And whilst it isn't, a silver bullet or a golden ticket, it does give the scheme the best chance of success because you're starting from that solid platform. And for us, in Sustrans and in London, where we've been having lots of conversations with local authorities, lots of conversations with TfL, we're really, focused on that transition from temporary and the emergency response, and then how that then transitions to that awful phrase semi-permanent, which really doesn't mean anything, or permanent, and how we make that movement and how tricky that is going to be. But the long-term success of all this momentum will be, what's still here in 2 years, 3 years. And for me, in order to realize that, there's just a few pretty obvious things. Interventions need to solve a problem. In terms of neighborhoods and low traffic neighborhoods, I think that's less of a factor because there's no neighborhood that wouldn't benefit from the removal or the significant reduction of traffic, obviously, but on other schemes perhaps. Local people need to understand why the change is happening and realize the benefit of that change for themselves. The process needs to be fair and transparent. The point about focusing your resources, and this has come up, both by Robert and Simon, and it's really valid, is this fact that there is only so much time, energy, and on any project, whenever you're engaging with anybody, you're going to have, again, another scale. And at one end are going to be the people that absolutely love what you're doing, absolutely all over it, just quivering with excitement. And then you've got the people at the other end of the spectrum who, we've talked about today, who absolutely do not want it. No matter, they're not listening, no matter what you tell them, they're never coming back. They're never going to be up for the scheme. But it's the other people, it's that 50, 60%, 70% of people who sit in the middle, who are either disenfranchised or very busy, or whose voices are seldom heard, or who have other priorities. Those are the people that we need to focus our time and resource on, because you speak to a higher percentage, the the highest percentage you can of those people, and you bring a certain percentage of those people on board, and then you've got your project, you've got your transition from temporary to permanent. And also the importance of placing equity at the heart of delivery. There's a really great article that I can share the link to, with an interview from Oakland, California, where they are delivering slow streets, and they're talking about what does equity mean in the delivery of slow streets. And actually, on all of their projects, their transport projects, one of the first questions they ask themselves is, how is this project advancing equity? Which, you know, as we all know, is more important, is, you know, incredibly important. And also the conversation needs to be more than just about COVID-19. We've got to move that conversation on. And I understand that obviously that's an integral part of the temporary nature of the scheme, is responding to the emergency, but we have to talk about other things, and engagement gives us a platform to talk about, you know, all of the things associated with healthy streets, all of the things about air quality and about physical activity and childhood independence and play. And those conversations need to be had. In terms of the sort of practicalities, I strongly believe we've got to engage from the outset. With the sort of, we've heard people talking about the, not today, but more generally, ETROs, and people saying there's just not time to engage. But again, that goes back to that scale of engagement. If there's time to design, there's time to engage. And at a minimum, I feel like if you, and again, this is kind of more referencing a low traffic neighborhood, but if we're delivering a low traffic neighborhood, it needs to have a comprehensive mail drop that's got the clear information on it, the myth busting, the frequently asked questions. And that just provides an opportunity to immediately kind of own the conversation and stop those kind of, those misinformation and kind of gossip from spreading around the scheme. It helps to GPS track that mail drop, because then you can be sure that everybody's got it, and can also show that track to anybody who claims not to have received it. Online presence, obviously, with maybe video presentations of what you're planning to do. I think it's important to ensure that people are able to engage, even if they have accessibility issues around the internet. So, you know, the possibility of having a phone bank, a scheduled phone bank for people to call in and ask questions. Pop-up engagement boards at key locations where people can either make notes actually on the boards, as we've done in Camden recently and Lewisham, or just as a means of gaining information in the street. We've talked about the importance of politics, and councillor engagement throughout is absolutely integral. You've got, you know, they have got to be kept on board. And then engagement with local stakeholders and community leaders to ensure that, you know, you're talking to the faith leaders, you're talking to the tenants and residents associations, you're talking to any local schools, just because they're such conduits of information, and they hold, you know, that position of trust in those communities, and, you know, they're very democratic spaces. And if you're able to share information with them and use them as a conduit, that's really great. And obviously at the outset, any kind of socially distanced engagement activity, as per government advice, you know, is also really useful. And you know, I definitely would consider this to be achievable within the sort of delivery timeframes that we're talking about in the emergency. And then once these things are in place, once the ETRO process is underway and schemes are in, you know, it's really important to keep that conversation going, no matter how much engagement you do at the beginning. And you could do it for, you know, I've done it for several months, and also a couple of weeks. People will inevitably come out and on the day of it's being delivered and sort of say, what's going on here? No one told me about this. But if engagement is ongoing, if you're available to some degree, you can answer to those questions during that process. It also presents opportunities to deliver important activity during that space. So this was literally lifted off Twitter today. It's from the scheme in Lambeth, where they're doing some community planting around the planters. And obviously this has happened in Waltham Forest, and there's lots of other examples. But it's just a brilliant way of bringing people together, engaging really positively around the scheme. There's designers in the room, there's also campaigners, but, you know, with the best will in the world, it's hard to always get it right first time. Things might need tweaking, things might need changing, and having that ongoing dialogue with the community of saying, you know what, it's just not working here. People are driving a mountain in the pavement and coming around, or there's now more traffic on this road. What can we do about that? If you're there, if you're engaging, if you're a presence, you're able to answer to those and make those changes quickly and efficiently to the scheme. It doesn't have to drag on for weeks, in which case you've already lost the argument. You can make those changes quickly and efficiently. And then it's just about continuing to share information and monitoring, and carefully monitoring, because again, if we're thinking about transitioning from temporary to permanent, we need the data. We need the data to be able to say this is working. And not just hard data, but conversations with people. How is this affecting you? How is this improving your life? Having that information is going to be really important as we then transition to permanent. And making sure that that data and that information is clear, accessible, relevant to the people who live there. As conditions allow, you'd want to start into having that conversation about that transition, both with scheduled events. Again, that's where you typically get like the people who are always there, always at events. And they tend to be those people who are on either end of the spectrum, the love it and shaking and the angry and shaking. And, you do need to answer to them, but you could have a scheduled event that responds to them. But what I'm interested in is the informal, unscheduled sort of pop-up activity in the street, where you get to engage with a mixed section of that local community, where you are able to actually talk to people in the spaces that have been changed. And then just continuing to work in close partnership with community leaders and other stakeholders. And just, again, just making sure you're moving that conversation on from COVID-19 and the emergency response to the wider conversation around the benefits that come from low traffic neighborhoods. And I guess just finishing with the importance of placing equity at the heart of what we're doing. These changes need to prioritize the people that need the change the most, not just deliver in the places where people are shouting the loudest. And that's our mandate, to change the cities where we live.